Imagine fleeing a completely collapsed, drought-stricken town, only to cross a militarized border into hostile enemy territory just to find like a single meal. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's a pretty intense scenario to picture.
Yeah, it really is. Today, we're looking at an ancient story of just absolute ruin. But before we even step into this survival story, I want to just pause and say to you, our listener, may God bless your day today.
Absolutely.
May He grant you a week ahead filled with deep peace, clear direction, and unexpected grace in whatever you are facing right now. We are so glad you are here with us.
We really are.
So for this deep dive, we are digging into the extensive historical notes and translations from two massive resources, which are the Holman and the NAA Study Bibles. And we're focusing entirely on just the first chapter of the book of Ruth.
Yeah, and it is just a remarkable piece of literature. When we strip away the religious familiarity that sometimes kind of coats this text, we are left with a masterpiece of ancient storytelling.
Right.
The decisions these characters make, they might read like minor footnotes to a modern audience, but in their original historical context, they were shocking, like taboo-breaking tactics for survival.
And that is exactly our mission today. We're exploring how this text uses sharp geographic irony and the literal meanings of ancient names to lay out a devastating rock-bottom crisis.
Yeah, it gets really dark.
It does. But the story doesn't leave you sitting in the rubble. It sets up a recovery that's sparked by a radical, fiercely loyal act that essentially breaks all the cultural rules.
Oh.
So let's jump right into the setting. The text opens by telling us these events take place in the days when the judges ruled.
Right.
So for someone trying to picture this world, what is the actual reality on the ground during that era?
Well, it is essentially a period of geopolitical and moral anarchy in ancient Israel. I mean, the book of Judges summarizes this era with a recurring, rather haunting phrase. It says, "In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes."
Wow. Everyone just doing whatever they want.
Exactly. We are talking about total moral relativism. There's no central government, no unified military, and the tribes are just highly fragmented.
So it's basically chaos.
Total chaos. It's an era defined by high anxiety, constant border skirmishes, and people just frantically scrambling to protect whatever they have.
And right in the middle of that cultural chaos, a massive famine hits. Which brings up the very first brilliant piece of irony in the text. The famine strikes a specific town called Bethlehem.
Yeah, the geography here is so intentional.
Right, because if you look at the original Hebrew from the study notes, Bethlehem translates directly to house of bread.
It does.
So the house of bread is literally out of bread.
The irony is sharp, you know? The house of bread is completely empty. And we have to remember the mechanics of an ancient agrarian society. Like, a famine wasn't just a temporary disruption in the supply chain where, I don't know, milk gets super expensive.
Like inflation today or something.
Yeah. Right. It's not that. It was a creeping existential threat. When the seasonal rains fail in that region, the crops don't grow, the livestock slowly die off, and the entire local economy just evaporates.
Right.
Starvation becomes a neighborhood reality. So because of this, a man named Elimelech makes a drastic decision. He takes his wife, Naomi, and their two sons, and they completely abandon their homeland. They migrate eastward into the land of Moab.
I want to spend a second on this migration, actually, because this isn't just, moving to a neighboring province for a better job.
Not at all.
This is like a family today fleeing a completely collapsed town and migrating into a hostile rival nation just to survive. Despite this massive cultural taboo,
Right.
Why is Moab such a controversial destination?
Well, to understand the scandal of this move, you really have to look at the deep-seated historical animosity between these two groups. I mean, Moab wasn't just a geographical neighbor. They were the traditional ancestral enemies of Israel.
They hated each other.
They did. They had a long history of bitter border conflicts. But beyond the politics, it was a profound religious clash. The Moabites worshipped completely different deities, most notably a god named Chemosh.
Chemosh, right?
And the historical record indicates that the worship of Chemosh involved horrifying practices, including child sacrifice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So for an Israelite family to seek refuge in Moab meant they were actively placing their physical survival above their national loyalty and above their religious purity.
They're stepping into a culture that represents literally everything they're supposed to oppose.
Exactly.
Which makes the patriarch's name incredibly fascinating to me, because ancient writers used names as narrative signals, right?
Right. They weren't just random tags.
Yeah. So the father who leads his family into this enemy territory, His name is Elimelech.
Right, and Elimelech translates to, my God is king.
See, the literary tension there is just amazing.
Yeah.
A man whose very name declares that the God of Israel is his ultimate authority, is the one who flees the land where that God rules.
Yeah, choosing to settle among people who actively sacrifice to foreign deities. It is a total contradiction between his identity and his actions.
It's wild.
And he is followed by his wife, Naomi, whose name means pleasant or agreeable, but the real shock, the real narrative punch, comes with the names of their two sons.
Yes. I was blown away when I read the translation for the sons and the sources. What did they actually name these boys?
So the sons are named Mahlon and Chilion. In ancient Hebrew, these root words essentially translate to sickness or disease and failing, mortality, or destruction.
They literally named their kids sickness and destruction.
Basically, yes.
You don't have to be a literary critic to see what the author is doing here. The text is screaming at the reader that this family is absolutely doomed.
It is a really dark, brilliant foreshadowing, and the cultural lines just continue to be crossed. Elimelech, the father, he dies shortly after they arrive in Moab.
So Naomi is left alone with sickness and destruction.
Literally. And what do these two Israelite sons do? They marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth.
Which is a massive red flag in this culture. The study notes point to a specific historical trauma involving Moabite women back in the book of Numbers, chapter 25. Can you break down why these marriages would have been viewed so negatively back home?
Sure, yeah. In Numbers 25, there is this catastrophic event where Moabite women seduced Israelite men not just into physical relationships, but into actually participating in the sacrificial cult of Baal Peor.
Right.
And it led to a massive religious falling out and a subsequent plague that killed tens of thousands of Israelites.
Tens of them.
Yeah, it was a national tragedy. So because of that specific trauma, marrying a Moabite woman wasn't just culturally frowned upon, it was viewed as an act of spiritual treason.
The fear of religious assimilation was intense.
Incredibly intense.
So they're living on enemy soil, married to women from a rival culture, and they stay there for about 10 years. But then, the names of the sons fulfill their destiny. Mahlon and Chilion both die. So we are suddenly left with 3 widows, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. I really want to ground this in reality for a second. Today, losing your husband and your children is a profound emotional trauma. But we have life insurance, we have state safety nets, we have legal property rights.
Right, there's infrastructure.
Exactly. What did this loss mean for Naomi in the ancient Near East?
It was an immediate economic death sentence. You have to understand, in that ancient patriarchal system, a woman's entire legal and economic existence was tethered to the men in her life. First, she was protected by her father, then her husband, and eventually her sons.
So the sons were the safety net.
Right. If you were a widow, your sons were essentially your retirement fund and your Social Security combined.
Because women couldn't just, go out and buy a new farm.
Exactly. Land rights were passed down strictly through the male bloodline. A widow had no legal mechanism to enforce the boundaries of her family's land, and without men to perform the intense physical labor of ancient farming, the land was useless anyway. Yeah, if a woman had no sons, her bank account was permanently wiped out. She would be forced to rely on the charity of gleaning scraps from other people's fields.
Just picking up leftovers.
Literally. And Naomi is aging. She's living as an immigrant in a foreign land where she has 0 expended family, and her safety net is entirely gone. She is staring down starvation.
She has hit absolute rock bottom. And it's right here in the deepest part of her despair that she hears a rumor. Word reaches Moab that the famine in Bethlehem is lifting. The text says God has visited his people and given them food.
Right.
So Naomi packs up to make the long journey back. But this initiates an incredibly tense confrontation on the road with her 2 daughters-in-law.
It really does. And the physical journey sets up a profound thematic journey. Because throughout this chapter, the Hebrew root word shove is used 12 different times. Shove, yeah. It means to return or to turn back. It is the driving pulse of the whole story. Naomi is physically turning back to Bethlehem, but it raises this massive question about spiritual turning. Like, is she returning to her faith? And what will these 2 Moabite women do?
Will they turn toward the God of Israel or turn back to their local God?
Exactly.
And Naomi forces that issue right there on the dusty road. She literally stops and actively tells Orpah and Ruth to leave her. She tells them to go back to their mother's houses in Moab so they can find Manucha.
Yeah, minutia is a crucial concept here. It translates to a state of rest, security, and safe haven. But Naomi isn't talking about, taking a nap.
Right.
In their cultural reality, minutia specifically referred to the institutional security provided by a husband. She is telling them, go back to your own people, find new Moabite husbands, and secure your future.
Here's where I really struggle with Naomi's logic, and I want to look closely at what she's actually doing here. She is an Israelite. She worships Yahweh, yet she is aggressively pushing her daughters-in-law to go back to Moab, which practically means sending them back to worship Chemosh. She is acting as an evangelist for a rival god. She's prioritizing a pagan marriage over keeping these women in her own faith. How do we make sense of that?
It's tough. It is a stunning moment that shows how extreme poverty and trauma can completely rewrite our priorities. To understand why Naomi pushes them away, we have to look at the ancient legal mechanism of levirate marriage.
Okay, what is that?
So under Israelite law in Deuteronomy, if a man died without leaving an heir, his brother was obligated to marry the widow.
Right, to produce a son that would carry the dead brother's name.
Precisely. The child from that new union would inherit the dead man's land, ensuring the widow wasn't thrown onto the street, and the family's property wasn't lost to outsiders. It was a built-in welfare system.
Okay, that makes sense for survival.
But Naomi looks at these two young women and applies just agonizing, cold, mathematical logic. She says, I have no more sons in my womb for you to marry. I am way too old to find a new husband. And she takes it to its most absurd logical conclusion to make her point. She essentially says, even if a miracle happened and I got married tonight and I gave birth to twin boys tomorrow morning, are you really going to waste the next 20 years of your youth waiting for infants to grow into men you can marry?
Saying the math simply doesn't work.
The math is impossible. And Naomi genuinely believes that God is intentionally punishing her. She states that the hand of the Lord has gone out against her.
Wow.
So from her perspective, she is a cursed woman. She loves Orpah and Ruth too much to drag them into her curse. She decides that their physical, economic survival is vastly more important than any theological allegiance. She demands they leave her to save themselves.
It is a heartbreaking, pragmatic kind of love. She forces a choice between sensible logic and radical loyalty.
And we have to give Orpah a lot of credit here. The text says she weeps, she kisses Naomi goodbye, and she turns back to Moab.
Yeah.
Orpah made the correct, rational decision. She chose survival. She did what every cultural norm of her day advised her to do.
She did the smart thing. But Ruth refuses the rational path. The author uses a very specific, loaded word to describe Ruth's reaction. From the sources, it says she clung to Naomi.
Yeah, the Hebrew word there is dabak. This is incredibly significant. Dabak does not just mean a tight embrace. It means to weld together.
To weld together.
Yes. It is the exact same word used in the book of Genesis when it describes a man leaving his parents to cleave to dabak to his wife. It is covenantal, permanent language. Ruth is binding herself to Naomi with an unbreakable seal.
She locks herself to Naomi
Right.
with what is probably one of the most famous declarations in all of literature. I mean, she says, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried.
It's beautiful.
When you break that vow down into its actual components, it is staggering.
It really is. She is completely dismantling her own identity on the side of a road. Your people shall be my people. She is essentially tearing up her passport, abandoning her family and her national protection. Your God, my God. She is committing religious treason against Moab, abandoning the gods of her ancestors. And she is doing all of this to tie her fate to an aging, impoverished widow.
And think about the psychological leap of faith required for the religious part of that vow. I mean, Naomi has just spent the entire conversation telling Ruth that Yahweh is actively destroying her life.
Yeah, she thinks God is her enemy.
Exactly. Ruth has absolutely zero empirical evidence that the God of Israel is kind, protective, or generous. Yet she chooses him anyway. She even invokes his personal name, Yahweh, declaring a death oath, like, may the Lord do so to me and more also if anything but death parts me from you. She is entirely all in.
Her sheer willpower just shuts the argument down. The text actually notes that when Naomi sees Ruth as absolutely determined, she stops speaking to her.
She just gives up trying to convince her.
Yeah. They walk the rest of the agonizing journey to Bethlehem in complete silence. Which leads us directly into the final profound scene of this chapter, their arrival in the house of bread.
Right? They finally walk into Bethlehem and it causes a massive commotion. The whole town is buzzing. You have to visualize the contrast here for a second. The last time this town saw Naomi, over a decade ago, She was a woman of means. She had a husband, 2 sons, and enough resources to fund an international migration.
Right.
Now she limps back into town, older, visibly worn down by grief, wearing the clothes of a destitute beggar. And the only thing she brings back is a young woman from an enemy nation. The women of the town are shocked. They look at her and ask, "Is this Naomi?"
And we remember that Naomi means pleasant. So they're basically asking, is this the pleasant one?
Wow.
And Naomi publicly rejects her own name. She tells the women of the town, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. And Mara translates directly to bitter.
She completely rebrands herself around her trauma.
Yeah.
And she doesn't hold back on why. She tells the entire town, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty."
She does.
She puts the blame squarely on God.
She does.
She acknowledges his supreme power. She calls him the Almighty. But she is a believer who is deeply, furiously angry with how that power has been used against her. She says God has testified against her and brought calamity on her head.
It is one of the most raw, unfiltered displays of grief in ancient literature. She isn't pretending to be okay. She isn't offering, spiritual platitudes to make her neighbors comfortable.
Right.
She is leaning fully into her bitterness, but the text presents us with a fascinating paradox in her complaint. She says, I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty.
Which is historically backward. When she left, there was a severe famine. Physically, she went away starving.
Exactly. She left physically empty but relationally full because she had her husband and her sons. Now she returns relationally empty. She has lost the men who provided her security, but she is entirely blind to the physical reality that is happening right in front of her face.
Which brings us to the subtle, incredibly hopeful detail tucked into the very last sentence of the chapter. They don't just arrive on a random Tuesday. They walk into Bethlehem right at the beginning of the barley harvest, which would be around April or May. The famine is definitively over. The fields are buzzing with workers and grain.
The geographic irony we discussed at the beginning just comes full circle here. Naomi is standing in Bethlehem, the house of bread, loudly declaring to anyone who will listen that she is entirely, hopelessly empty.
Yeah.
And she's saying this while the golden stalks of barley are literally sprouting out of the ground all around her. The provision has already returned.
That is such a powerful image. If we step back and look at the entire arc we've covered today, from a desperate family making a disastrous migration, through the absolute worst socioeconomic devastation the ancient world could offer, to this bittersweet homecoming driven by one woman's defiant loyalty, there's just a profound takeaway here.
I agree. It serves as a reminder that the massive hinges of history often turn not on the decisions of kings or armies, but on the quiet, illogical loyalty of ordinary people. Without Ruth's debauch, her stubborn cleaving Naomi would have starved, and the historical lineage that follows them would have just vanished in Moab.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to carry into your week. Picture that final scene again. Naomi is standing in the middle of her hometown, broadcasting her bitterness. She is complaining that God has brought her back utterly and completely empty.
Yeah.
But think about who is standing right next to her, Ruth, a woman who just gave up her country, her family, and her religion just to make sure Naomi didn't die alone. Yet Naomi doesn't even acknowledge Ruth in her speech.
No, she doesn't.
She is completely blind to her. It makes you wonder, in our own lives, when the bottom falls out and everything goes wrong, how often do we become so hyper-focused on our own perceived emptiness and our own bitterness that we completely miss the literal grace, the fierce loyalty, and the seeds of our future standing right beside us?
It's so true. Grief and bitterness can act as blinders. They convince us the room is empty even when help has already arrived.
They really do.
Oh.
Well, that concludes our journey into the first chapter of Ruth. Thank you for joining us to look past the surface of this ancient text and discover the profound human survival story underneath. We appreciate you spending your time with us. God blesses all the listeners. Take care, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.